Paul Erdos has been legendary as a collaborator, and you are one of his foremost collaborators. Somebody compiled a list of collaborations, and you are listed as number 5 among his lifetime collaborators. Now, you first met Paul Erdos in '48, but you did not immediately start working together. When was it that you actually became a collaborator of Paul Erdos?
I really can't point out which was our first paper and when we sat down at the first time to work, but that is really true that whenever he came to Hungary, we tried to work on something, and whenever we met abroad, we worked on something.
Mm-hmm. So how often would Erdos visit Hungary after '56?
First, I say how often he visited before '38, because he left '34 and went to Cambridge, and then 3 times a year he came back very regularly. After '56, I would say yearly, and maybe for longer time, because his mother lived in Hungary. But later on, he forced his mother, or I don't know how to formulate it, to travel with him.
There was also this resort in the Matra.
Yes, yes. So he did like to, when he came, then he spent a month or even more. And actually, what most of the people maybe really don't know, that for many, many years, actually until the end of his life, he had a sort of job at the Rényi Institute. The sort of means that he had a job, he was paid for as many months as he spent in Hungary, but this was his only permanent place, really.
And he also had an apartment in Budapest.
Yes, but after his mother died and his mother lived in that apartment, he never lived in that apartment really, then he refused to enter the apartment. Yes, so he was extremely sensitive, really.
But he would lend that apartment to friends and colleagues,
yes,
to live there, so that was put to good use in the apartment.
Yes.
So can you say something about the subject of your joint papers with Paul Erdos?
I mentioned one, which was on extremal problems of hypergraphs. And in that paper, writing that paper, this conjecture in a more general form. We formulated that conjecture.
You mean the 3-6 conjecture?
The 3-6, but of course in a general form. And then it's really, as you mentioned, the Ramsey-Turan, which is why it is called, because there is a famous Ramsey theorem and now a Ramsey theory. In every disorder you find some order. If you take a graph and you take the complement of this graph, so 2 arbitrary graphs, then either the graph or the complement must contain a very ordered structure, substructure. First it was formulated for complete graphs, so it must contain a complete subgraph which has the size depending on the number of vertices and large enough. And then it came up the question, in some sense a combination of the Turan extremal theorem and the Ramsey theorem, that the combination of that leads to interesting questions, and some of the questions are still open. And we started to work on this with Erdos, and then András Hajnal joined to this club, and then Szemerédi joined, and then Simonovic joined. So the last paper on that subject is a 5-tuple paper.
The Turan problem asks how big a graph can you have without a clique of a given size. Ramsey prohibits large cliques as well as large independent sets, and now you combined these two. So the extremal kind of graphs that come out of Turan's theorem, they are prohibited by these extra conditions, and that leads to a new world.
Yes, and would say add that the so-called extremal graph, which has a maximal number of edges without containing a complete graph of a certain size, has a very special structure. And in this very special structure, we have very large empty graphs, which means very large parts where we do not have an edge. And but if you try to see what happens when you try to move from this very special one. So for example, when you suppose that you don't have a large subset without any edge, then this is actually the Ramsey-Turan type problem to answer the question how many edges you can have in such a graph. And this is already a question. Nowadays, I think it is good to mention the name of Semeredi, who got the Abel Prize not so long ago, that Semeredi, so-called Semeredi regularity lemma, so the main lemma what he used, or almost that one in his famous RKN problem, arithmetic progression proof, used also here, is used also here.
This is maybe one of the good examples that you always like to look behind the phenomena and somehow try to find some core reasons and explanations.
To give a proof where you don't see the real reason why the theorem is true, it is not enough. So, in some sense, so if I mention the four-color conjecture, if I may, then this is a good example that there are some people who still feel that you do not see the core of the proof. And this can happen in many cases, and when you are looking for the real meaning of the proof, then you often find such problems, I think.